Hi, I'm Bill, the Domestic Monk. Welcome back to another video, and thanks very much for watching. So I'm moving this channel in another direction today. I've been contemplating doing interviews for some time. And this channel, as you know, is about encouraging Catholics to learn, love, and live their faith. And I want to start doing interviews with people who can provide some insights into the different aspects of the faith. So I'm excited today to have my first guest, my good friend, J. Patrick Rick. And I've got a book here written by Patrick that has just about a little bit of everything. It's called The Abbey and Me, Renegades, Rednecks, Real Estate, and Religion. So this book has got everything. Vietnam veterans, American Indians, a land dispute, the FBI, even Marlon Brando. And the Catholic Church is right smack in the middle of it. And I think it's a story that anybody who's interested in the Catholic Church here in the United States would be interested in. So before we jump into that, I want to give you a little background on my first guest. Pat, who, like I mentioned, is a dear friend of mine, proud to call my friend. We met in another life when we were both almost neighbors living in sunny Southern California in the city of Laguna Hills. And I met him when I was running for sheriff in 2005. And since then, we've become great friends, and I've learned a lot about his background. He's had just an interesting life beyond the story that we're going to be telling today. For instance, Pat, you were a Bill Clinton impersonator, were you not?
Yes. Did somebody tell you?
Yeah, you told me. So how did that come about? Did you initiate that, or did someone approach you? How does one become a presidential impersonator?
I had just recently moved out to California from Texas, and I had people coming up to me, total strangers, saying, "Has anybody ever told you look like Bill Clinton?"
So how do you package that into becoming an impersonator? What's an impersonator do? How long did you do it? What's the process there?
Well, the process there is if you're interested in doing something like that, and I was interested in doing something like that, began to meet and greet people that were in the impersonator business, you know, right out there in California where you used to live. I just began to meet people, and people telling me how I should not do this, and so I sort of hit the big time. Leno, Letterman, those type of shows, some of the shows that were on, sitcoms at the time. I got to do a little bit of everything. It was a learning experience.
And also, you traveled around speaking at kind of political functions all over the country, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. You know, business meetings, medical conventions. Was introduced as Bill Clinton, and then people would realize once I came on the stage and started talking or whatever, they would realize, oh, it's one of those guys.
So how did you get bookings? Like, is this something that you cultivated yourself? Did you have an agent? How'd that work?
I had an agent. It was called a hip pocket agent. So someone who didn't necessarily sign you up, but they would be willing to bring opportunities to you. And so I worked the system as best I could.
And you worked also with a Hillary Clinton impersonator. Isn't that right?
Teresa Bournwell. I've got a great story about Teresa. Can I tell you this story real quick?
Good story. We'd love to hear it.
When Hillary was running, Teresa had been flown out to New York because they were certain that Hillary was going to become president. Well, it didn't work out that way. And Teresa, my good friend, she must have been more unhappy than Hillary was herself that night.
How long did you do this? Like, Hillary or Bill Clinton was in office from what, 92 to 98?
Something like that. My memory is not so good anymore.
Yeah. So did you do that during the whole time? Did it last beyond?
I personally did not expect Bill Clinton to win, but he did, and he did again. And so I milked a total of about 10 years out of this.
That's awesome. So was it profitable? Did it pay well?
I didn't ask you how much you made.
I'm just asking on behalf of all the aspiring presidential impersonators out there, is it a lucrative business?
It can be. So, and yes, it was. and I'm glad I did it. It was a lot of fun, and it was not easy doing all of this without letting the world know what my political leanings were, or even are now.
Okay, enough about that. Let's turn to the subject at hand. So Pat's book, as I mentioned earlier, is called The Abbey and Me. First of all, Pat, who is the man on the cover of the book?
Well, that happens to be Brother John Howard, now deceased.
Okay.
But he was the fellow that came out to meet me and see if I was good enough to be an Alexian brother.
This is the first time we heard this term, Alexian brother. What is an Alexian brother, and how did you become familiar with them?
The Alexian Brothers are a group of religious men who, in this case, the Alexian Brothers operated hospitals.
Okay, so they're a religious order?
They are a religious order, yes they are. They have dwindled over the years, but they are a religious order.
Okay, and so their care is providing medical care, and they do like nursing, and they staffed psychiatric hospitals and those types of things in their heyday.
Yes, they did whatever they could do. They might be nothing but a janitor, but still be an Alexian brother. Or they may be the administrator of a hospital they own.
Interesting. So all of these religious orders, you know, they have a start in a founder somewhere. Do you know what's the history of the Alexians? Where did they come from? You know, and how did they come to be here in the United States? Are they from the United States?
The Alexian Brothers originated in Germany, the lowlands, in a response to the Dark Ages when people were dying of disease. So that's where the Alexian Brothers started. They eventually made their way to the United States, and this was around the end of our Civil War.
1866, I think, is where they came into the United States, and they were headquartered in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, one Alexian brother landed in New York, and he eventually made his way to Chicago and St. Louis.
Chicago and St. Louis, they're going to play into our story as we take this thing forward. So now you mentioned that it was during the period of the plague in the Middle Ages when they came together as a group, and they have a particular charism, right? The Alexians, and that's what caused you to be interested in to begin with, right? What is that?
Well, I was interested in medicine. Somehow, some way, I was going to be involved in medicine. And it might be just nothing but an orderly, or I might be a lab tech, radiology, all those disciplines that still exist today in a modern hospital. That's what the Alexian Brothers were doing. Whatever fit their ability to do something worthwhile.
So you're graduating high school, and you're discerning joining this religious order. When did you go in?
It would have been about this time in the summer of 1966. That's when I entered the Brothers. I flew in from Houston to Chicago, caught up with about a dozen other men who were doing the same thing.
First of all, where was this? This place that they flew you into, where was it?
Well, they flew us into Chicago. We went to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in Chicago, which is also, or was also, a school for nurses in Chicago.
And is that where you were trained?
Bill, we boarded a train. We went up to Milwaukee. We landed in Gresham, Wisconsin, and that's where their training facility was.
And for a young boy from Beaumont, Texas, that must have been quite a change.
It was very refreshing to move to Wisconsin, not humid Beaumont.
So talk to me about the Abbey itself. What was it like? What was this facility like? Where was it located? Was it in the city? Was it in a rural area? What was the setting?
It was very rural. We were in the high, not real far north, but very much getting into the north woods of Wisconsin.
What was life like for you guys? So in a religious order, you normally go in and there's a period of, what do you call that first phase? Is it you're a novice or a postulate or something like that?
You begin as a postulant, and you will be, if you remain there and you're not thrown out or you don't just decide to leave, you might make it a novice. I became a novice, one of 8 novices.
So how long were you at the Abbey?
I would say it was approximately 9 months, roughly.
Okay. So did you guys jump right into training for, like, or was it just an introduction to religious life where you guys got involved in the daily prayer routine and that stuff? What was life like back in the 1960s in a, kind of a rural religious order?
You start off with a bang. You might get 24 hours to recover from traveling up there, but then you had to get up at 4:50 in the morning to say prayers. We were already lost, but we had to learn how to do what everybody else was doing, because we had another 6 months to go before we would become a novice. But we were given duties to do. We were, I don't know how they decided, but I think they figured out some of us were capable of working outside and driving a tractor, like myself.
I mean, it sounds a little bit like the military to me. Everybody shows up from everywhere and they get you snapped in right away. They don't give you a lot of time, right? They get you into the life. So they're working on religious formation and they're developing your work habits and that sort of thing, right? And all of the work you guys did, which is typical of a religious order, is going towards sustaining the Abbey, right? The life of the Abbey. So you're maintaining the property, keeping it clean, cooking food, maintaining the lawn, all that stuff, right?
Yes, yeah. I started out in the summer, and it wasn't long after I was on a tractor shoveling snow.
That's interesting. So what caused you to leave the Abbey?
It was not the right thing for me. That's the best way to put it. In retrospect, the day I left, I felt like I should not have left, but I did. I just got on a plane and flew back to Texas.
That's what they called it. It's a discerning process, right? Like you said, how many did you start with, and then how many became novices, and then I'm sure there were a fewer number than that became brothers. And we have talked in the past. I mean, that was in the wake of Vatican II, and the church was in a little bit of unrest, and a lot of the religious orders started taking a hit at that time, right? I mean, there just wasn't the same general consistency and security in those religious orders during that time. It was a tumultuous period all the way around, as we're going to find out as we continue with this story.
When I arrived, there were probably, I want to say, around 350 Alexian Brothers in the United States. Today, there's maybe 35. Things have changed.
So, Pat, you said you were there for a year. So you got there in 66, you left in 67.
Yes.
And how long did the Abbey stay in business, functioning as a training ground for new novices?
Only another 2+ years, and they shut the door.
And so what happened with the Abbey after it closed? Before the incident we're going to talk about, but after it closed, what was going on there?
Well, they were removing things of value, but the place was left in good, capable hands. They had an engineer and his family who took care of the place. The Alexian Brothers, the ones that were left, they moved up to Chicago and continued with their training. Some of them were going to school. There were others that were still novices 2 years. And so it was, up in 1967, that was a brand new hospital in Chicago. So they didn't miss a beat. They were training these young men.
So you mentioned a gentleman, I believe that was Joe Palanca, who was the caretaker for the property?
Yes.
And so they were trying to sell it, right? So they just had his family there, and they were basically getting this thing ready for sale, and they wanted to make sure everything, because it was a big place, right? What was the history of the Abbey? How did the building start?
In the 30s, a very wealthy woman whose husband was with the Nabisco Company, when he died, this woman decided to take her daughter, who was chronically ill, and she built this mansion in the woods. Built a hill, put it on the hill in view of the beautiful waterfall there. The daughter died before they moved in. So there was this woman all by herself, except for a chauffeur, a cook, a maid, a housekeeper. She had plenty of help. And she did her best to put herself into the community. She did not fit the community, and she was lonely. So she decided that she would move back to New York, and then she made it a point to give it to the Alexian Brothers. So she presented this to, and she said, "It's all yours."
Do you know when that took place?
Yes. She built the mansion. That's all that was there. And this would have been in the late 30s that she decided to give this to the Alexian Brothers. The brothers said thank you, and they set up shop there for training Alexian Brothers.
And did they have to property at all in order to make it suitable for their needs?
Well, no, it was the mansion was big, but it wasn't big enough. So the Alexian Brothers decided to build a novitiate, but they added on another, I want to say another 2/3 is where the novitiate was built, and that's when they brought all the other brothers from Chicago or other places where they were being trained. So all the novices, all the postulates came to Wisconsin.
Okay, Pat, so the incidents you write about in the book involves a renegade Indian takeover of the Abbey that made national news in the 1970s, right? Who are these Indians?
About a mile away from the monastery is where the tribal area for the Menominee Indians. And they had some run-ins with them from time to time. As a matter of fact, the FBI had been out and warned them of what was getting ready to happen.
So obviously there was some discord amongst the Menominee tribe. What was going on with them?
Well, they had lost their tribal status. The federal government terminated them, and it cost them big money. They were impoverished.
What caused them to take over the Abbey? Like, what benefit did they see in that?
The tribe needed a hospital, and these young men thought they could turn this place into a hospital.
Interesting. Okay. So how did the incident start?
New Year's Eve, early in the morning, before the sun came up, the caretaker, his wife, some guests were there, and their children were asleep in the bed. There was a knock on the door. Joe Plonka walked over to the door cautiously. He had put a pistol, a Derringer pistol, put that in his pocket. When he answered the door, just as they were saying they were having car trouble, they burst in. I say they, 2 or 3 people burst in, followed by more and more Native Americans. There was a shot. There were many people that weren't in the room that thought, oh gosh, somebody's been shot and killed. Actually, it was a high-powered rifle that put a hole in the ceiling.
Okay. So there was a number of guys who came in and initiated this takeover.
There were somewhere around 30, no more than 30. But not all of them were in this house. They couldn't have accommodated that many people. It's just the ones who taken on the responsibility. There are people outside doing guard duty. Leader of the Menominee warriors, I don't want to call it the tribe, because the tribe wasn't behind this. Okay. It was the warriors.
So these are warriors acting independently, doing something that they think is going to benefit the tribe.
They thought they could be heroes doing what they were doing.
So they end up breaking into the caretaker's house. They take the caretaker, his wife, 2 kids, and their 2 guests into custody. What happens next?
They demanded they get in touch with the Alexian Brothers because they wanted to tell the Alexian Brothers they wanted the deed to that place.
How long were they held in captivity by the Menominee tribe?
Several very long hours being scared to death.
And what happened during the interim of those 6 hours or 7 hours?
They were calling all over the country trying to reach an Alexian brother in charge, someone with the highest rank. What they found was Brother Maurice Wilson. Brother Wilson was in New Jersey. He was fast asleep, and he was called out to duty.
So you mentioned that they wanted the Alexians to turn over the Abbey to them because they wanted a hospital?
Well, all those details didn't come up, but they said that there was a treaty that showed that they really did own it. That was not true. That was not proven to be correct. But they wanted to negotiate. That's why Brother Maurice Wilson flew to Chicago and then drove up to Wisconsin. Now we're looking at the day after.
Okay, so as I understand it, the original demand was, we want to talk to somebody in authority with the Alexians, and if that happens, we'll release these hostages.
Brother Maurice told him on the telephone that he would come there to negotiate and talk to them if they would let the captives go.
Okay.
And the Indians did agree to let them go.
Okay, so what happens next? I mean, how did this incident progress? Did law enforcement get involved? What happened?
Initially, it was local law enforcement, and they from some other cities even came out to participate. The ones in charge at the time was the county of Shawano. That was the county where this took place.
Okay.
The sheriff allowed his men to go commandeer a farmhouse, and they did. And almost immediately, the Indians were shooting at deputies, and the deputies were shooting at Indians.
So how far apart was the Abbey from this farmhouse?
I'm going to say approximately 900 yards between. So bullets sometimes just didn't make it that far.
So this is really, I mean, this is a serious incident. I mean, you have discharge of a weapon immediately when they enter this property to take the caretaker and his family into custody, and then law enforcement gets on the scene, and it's basically a shootout, right? The Cowboys and Indians over a 900-yard expanse. How long did this go on before calmer heads got involved?
It was a couple of days before the National Guard took charge and dismissed the deputies.
Okay. What did the National Guard do?
Sit in snow for several weeks.
Really? So it was basically a standoff.
What a miserable thing this was. They had to dig foxholes in the snow.
Okay, so we've got this standoff going. No, how long did this entire incident take?
34 days.
34 days. So we know that they took over, they triggered his family to use as leverage to bring in an Alexian brother. The brother comes. Do they start negotiations? What happens?
They started out very early by bringing a school bus out there and parking the school bus almost exactly between the monastery and the farmhouse where everybody was shooting that direction and that direction shooting back.
What was the purpose of the school bus?
Well, to do a no man's land, to do negotiation.
Okay.
The Indians weren't going to go down the street to the courthouse and talk about this because they'd be arrested. So they wanted a place that they could run to if they had to, and they did. The first day they met, they invited the Indians to meet them there, and they cautiously went there. When they got there, they found that liquor, and the Indians, "Nuh-uh, you're not going to get us drunk, and we are here to take this place."
And so, how often did these guys meet? Did this just go on for, that month, or what happened?
I think they only had 2 or 3 days where they met at the no man's land.
Okay.
And then the National Guard ran a landline across, and so that's how they communicate, is a landline that ran from the monastery up the hill toward the farm.
Okay. So it's my understanding that at some point, the actor Marlon Brando got involved in this thing. How did he get involved? Was he brought in by one side or the other, or what instigated that?
When he found out about this place, he saw an opportunity for himself, and so he asked the Alexian Brothers and other people taking care of this to meet him at the Atlanta airport.
Okay.
And we accomplished nothing there.
Okay.
But he made a lot of promises. Not long after that, Brando flies into Wisconsin, where this took place, and he was invited to come in. So he did go into the monastery.
Okay. So invited by the Indians to go in?
The Indians got a message to him that he would come in. He could come in safely.
And what happened?
He was not treated well by the Indians because they knew he was just being in the way. Okay. And
they considered him a publicity stunt, basically.
Right. Now, let me tell you, it's things like this were going on. He sat down with the Indian. "Oh, I'll help you. I'll use some of my money to help you out." And one of the Indians says, "Well, why don't you give me your Rolex watch?" Took his Rolex watch and a grand gesture. They knew he could do nothing for them. They had to do what they had to do to make it happen.
And at one point in time, you told me in the past that they took him up on the roof. What was happening up there?
Did. They took him through a hatch to the very top, and there's no gunfire going place at the happening at the time. But he got out, stood up, looking around. All of a sudden, ammunition flying by. He gets on his hands and knees and begs to be helped back downstairs where someone couldn't shoot him.
Wow. So needless to say, Marlon Brando didn't bring the incident to a close.
No, he left.
We talked earlier on this. You mentioned there was another incident. It may be rumor, but there was another incident involving Marlon Brando that was a prank played on him that may have been the inspiration for a famous scene in the Godfather movies. What was that?
Well, I have been told, and others have denied, but the story goes that when he went to bed one night, he got a sleeping bag, there was a severed horse's head in his sleeping blanket. Okay,
so far we've got the local sheriff. He doesn't handle it. We've got the National Guard sitting out there in the standoff. You know, these guys are lobbing around us back and forth for each other over a month. Marlon Brando comes up. I'm sure there were a lot of other people involved. And of course, brother Maurice Wilson, he was the Alexian brother who flew in from Chicago to negotiate with the Indians. What happened with him? I mean, how did this incident get resolved?
He made several trips to Chicago. The authorities thought it was unsafe for him to meet with them directly, but he did make telephone calls. He talked to the chairman of the tribe, who, by the way, was a woman, and her name was Ada Deer. Ada Deer was so angry with the tribal members who did this, she ignored him because she was not for this. She said a hospital is already planned and it's going to be on our property, and I'm not going to put up with this. So the warriors were fighting a lost cause because she was not even supporting them, the chairman of the tribe itself.
Wow, so it's just a political nightmare, right? I mean, you have these warriors acting on their own. You got the legitimate tribe leadership who's not supporting them, but they don't have any authority. Really, she doesn't have any more authority over them than the government who's trying to get them out of the building.
There were fathers of tribal members who were warriors. There were fathers of them that were saying, you should not be doing this. This is wrong. So some of the more mature people on the reservation did not like what the warriors were doing.
So what was happening to this beautiful property over the 30 days that this was going on?
Well, they lost power to the place because there were neighboring farmers they climbed some of the poles and shut off the electricity. This was one of the coldest winter in history there, and so when you shut down the power, you lose warmth, and the pipes begin to freeze. And that was the death knell to this place when the power went off.
So it basically rendered the building unserviceable going forward.
Yes, even though it was still standing, it was the end of the place.
And so how was it? How did this thing finally resolve? Did everybody go out in a gunfight, like down in Waco, or did it just kind of fitter out?
It almost was a Waco, but it was not a Waco. They brought in half tracks, military equipment, something that could blast holes into the stone of this beautiful place. And they were getting ready to do that to them. They were going to gas the place and have them come out. The Indians saw the light, and there was only about 30 that stood there until the National Guard went in. And when the Indians saw what was going to happen, they said, "Okay, we give up," and they did.
And what happened? Did they get arrested? Were they prosecuted? What happened with that?
They were all arrested that remained in there, and they began to let some of them go. But there were about 3 or 4 that had to go to trial. And one of them went to jail for about 8 years.
Wow. That's a pretty crazy story. So now what's happening with the Abbey since then? Was that the end of the place? What's going on with it now?
It's been under the hands of many owners. The most recent owner is really making a genuine effort to bring the place up to speed.
Nice.
Because the only thing there, in between those days when the place was taken over and the year 2000, the place was torn down.
Really?
Completely. And the only thing remaining is the mansion itself.
So all the perimeter buildings, the ancillary buildings were all torn down, and we're right back to the original building that woman started with in the 1930s.
Yes.
So Pat, during this whole process, I mean, you spent years involved in research for the Abbey and Me, and as a result of that, you've become kind of for lack of a better term, a historian on the Alexians. And during your investigation and interviewing people for this thing, you wrote another book that was based upon the role that the Alexians played in the exorcism that the movie The Exorcist was based upon. And you authored a book called That Purloined Diary, an unsettling case study of exorcism, a factual account inspiring the book and the movie The Exorcist. So the title's interesting, That Purloined Diary. What does that mean? What's the significance of that?
The word purloin, I think, is really mostly from Old English times. Purloin, if you purloin something, you may steal it without the owner knowing, use it, then sneak it back to the ownership. That's what purloin means. So,
how did that play into this case with The Exorcist?
Well, there was a diary that was written by the Alexian Brothers as well as the Jesuit priests that handled this exorcism that took place in St. Louis.
So, as I understand the way exorcisms work, these things take place over a period of time, and they documented the interaction that they had with the child.
Yes, it is a day-by-day description of what took place, the good and the bad, with this young man.
And was it ever released publicly?
No, but it did get out from time to time, but it was not published.
So how did you learn about this diary, and how did it end up in your possession?
I got a strange telephone call one day or night, and fella introduced himself, and he says, I read your book, I enjoyed it. What would you say if I told you I had that diary? I said, well, I would be interested. So that resulted in several meetings with this person, also in Wisconsin.
So Who was this guy? What was his role? And how did he end up with the diary?
The man who called me on the telephone introduced himself, and he told me, I have a copy of the diary. He says, as a matter of fact, I got the actual diary itself, and I copied it along with some other nurses in training, and we typed all night long and produced this 25-page document.
What was the story? How did that happen? Like, how did he encounter that? Where did he come across this diary, and why was there a need for him to, like, steal it and copy it at night?
Their nursing school was right next to the St. Louis Hospital. One of the patients there happened to be one of the Alexian Brothers. That's just coincidental. They found out that he had a copy of the diary, and they decided to purloin that and take it back to their dormitory and type all night long, and then return it to the Alexian brother who had his copy.
They did that without him knowing it?
Yeah. Once he went to sleep, they took it and they brought it back before he awakened.
And when did this occur? What year was that?
Again, the late 60s.
Late 60s. And
Yeah.
so, and when did this gentleman reach out to you?
Well, he read my book, and
Which book? You read The Abbey and Me?
The Abbey and Me, right, the first book. He said, would you like to have a copy of the diary? I said, well, yes, I would. He says, well, I'll mail it to you. I said, please do not put that in the mail. We either will meet or you will give me a copy of what you have.
Okay.
So he sent it to me, FedEx, whatever, sent it to me, and I could tell this was something special to have. I was not the only person in the world that had a copy of it, because there's, Alexian Brothers. They probably have their own copies.
What was the purpose of this guy? Like, if he obtained this thing back in the 60s, what was he doing with it for the 20 years or so before he reached out to you?
I suspect he wanted some recognition that he has it. Here it is, all these years, he's had this special document here. And I think, before he passed on, he might like to be recognized as one of the men who had the diary.
They went through a lot of effort to get a hold of this diary. Does it contain anything specific that would make the church unwilling, number one, to release it publicly, and number two, compel them to, develop this scheme to steal it and copy it?
The demonic behavior that was demonstrated on several occasions. You can tell that someone who wrote the diary was not trying to be spectacular with this, but to give the facts. And the facts were, the boy was almost impossible to handle. But what's described in there is worth reading.
So it does give a little credibility to what eventually was dramatized in the Exorcist movie, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you know if William Peter Blatty, who is the gentleman who authored The Exorcist, did he ever acquire that diary? Did he have access to it?
Yes. And since we last talked, I have uncovered some information that Blatty finally got the information, and probably from one of the Jesuits.
So, Pat, where can people get a copy of The Abbey and Me and The Purloined Diary if they're interested?
Go to Amazon and send them $17.
Perfect. Amazon. And I will put a link to both of these books in the description below. You also produced a short documentary called The Novitiate. Was that based on the incident that The Abbey and Me describes?
Yes, it's a compressed 15 minutes that takes people through what happened in the Novitiate in Wisconsin.
And is that video still available, and how can people watch it?
Yes, you can go to YouTube and you can find it there.
Perfect. So what's going on with this project now, Pat? Do you have any plans for the future with it?
Well, I have been for several years. I've been knocking on doors, trying to find production people that would be interested in telling this story. Someone who wants to produce a movie. This is worthy of another 90 minutes on film.
Yeah, I mean, this story, it's a crazy story. It's got everything there, all the elements for the drama and you've got the church and the Indians and the property dispute. And you don't need to exaggerate that thing in any way. You can just tell the story as it is, and I think you'd have a heck of a movie.
I think so.
If someone's interested in helping you with this project, how can they contact you?
My email address is patrickrick@gmail.com.
Okay, I'll put that in the link below too. Wow, Pat, that was fascinating. I told you Pat had an interesting life, from his life as a novice in an obscure religious order to the Hollywood big screen as a Bill Clinton impersonator, to his role in publishing the Exorcist diaries. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. So, Pat, I really appreciate you taking the time to share this information with us, and I thank you for the time.
Bill, I appreciate it, and I wish you well with your inaugural interview.
Thank you very much, Pat. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it with others. And thanks very much for watching. And as always, the Emperor Adelante.